Hello, my name is Peter and I am a lifelong Star Trek fan. I've watched every episode of Star Trek or film of Star Trek ever made, and in this brand new YouTube channel, it's my intention to rewatch all Star Trek from the very beginning, the very first pilot, and share with you what I consider to be the good, the bad, and the trivia. This series assumes that you have seen Star Trek before, that you are not new to this, and you will not be spoiled by what I am going to share. This is not a Star Trek reaction channel reacting to Star Trek for the first time. If I were to react to Star Trek, it would be for the 1000th time, let's put it that way. If you want to go and check out a Star Trek reaction channel, I highly recommend bunnytailsREACTS. She is a phenomenal reactor to Star Trek content and goes into very, very fine detail on her opinions. So do go and check her out. I can highly recommend that. So maybe you want to go and watch her react to The Cage and then come back here and then see my opinion on what I think is good, what I think is bad, and share with you some deep trivia of the episode, things that you may or may not have noticed. So with that being said, let's get started with the first ever pilot episode dating back to 1964, and it's called The Cage. So first we're going to go through everything that I like in The Cage, everything that I thought was good, the highs if you will. And my first one is the opening theme from Alexander Courage, a fantastic composer who composed the iconic Star Trek theme that lives on to this day and features in contemporary Trek that we have in modern times. So a massive, massive high for me is Alexander Courage's iconic score, and it's right from the very beginning, the first thing that you hear, and it leads into the episode getting started, this pilot episode, The Cage. And the second thing that you notice is the iconic USS Enterprise, that magnificent Starship Enterprise that we have all come to know and love. You see a wonderful view, a remastered view, if you are watching the remastered versions, which it's hard not to now. Actually, the original effects versions are hard to find these days, but wow, those remastered shots are beautiful, and that is my second high of this episode. The ship looks absolutely wonderful, and we pan down onto the saucer section, onto the transparent ceiling of the bridge, and right into the bridge shot, where appropriately, and this is my third good point, my third high, we see Leonard Nimoy as Spock, who, as I said, very appropriately utters the first line ever in Star Trek, which is "check the circuit," and it's a very un-Spock-like performance. Actually, Spock is very emotional in this pilot episode. This is not the Spock that we would all come to know and love, but so appropriate in my opinion that Nimoy gets the first ever line. And this is because, in my opinion, Spock is the definitive Star Trek character. If you think of all of the amazing characters in Star Trek over the years, Nimoy as Spock really is everything, because he has been across multiple versions of Star Trek. He's been in the original series, the animated series, the Next Generation, and more. He crops up all over the place in Star Trek Discovery, in Prodigy. So fantastic. I think Leonard Nimoy is the GOAT of Star Trek for me, with apologies to Mr. Shatner. But that is absolutely a wonderful way to start. My next absolute high is Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike. Right from the bat, we see a wonderful performance from Hunter, who just immediately, is in charge of this ship. He is under control. He has it all figured out, or so we think. But he sets the tone really for this ship. He leads by example, and he is just a presence, and we can tell this from the very get-go. The next thing I really like is Peter Juria, hope I'm saying his name correctly, as Navigator Jose Tyler at what will become the Navigator's station, but in the first couple of pilots, I'm pretty sure it's meant to be the helm, because that is the station that takes the Enterprise to speeds in impulse and at warp. So maybe the Navigator, maybe the helmsman, it's never made clear, but Peter Juria as Tyler gives an immediate energy, an immediate sense of purpose. He's very young, he's very vital, and I really like what he brings. You'll note as well, this probably should be in the trivia section, but I'm going to mention it anyway. He has a bandage on his hand at this point, and this is in reference to a previous mission where some of the senior bridge crew were injured in that mission. So really like Tyler, a great addition to the cast in this episode. The next member of the cast that I really like that we hear speak next is Majel Barrett Roddenberry, as she would become, as number 1, the first officer of the ship. Now, just a reminder that I will be in spoiler territory in this series, so I'm going to say right away that this is the only appearance for Tyler and number 1. Well, number 1 as played by Majel Barrett Roddenberry anyway, in Star Trek the original series. So, what a character, and sets an immediate tone for being a female first officer of this starship. And this is something that the networks pushed back on very, very powerfully. They did not like having a female in such a position of power. Gene Roddenberry was trying to be very progressive, but he won certain battles, he lost certain battles. This was the battle he lost, but he always joked when he was alive that he had to remove the woman from the bridge, but he won because he ended up marrying her. So there you have it. So I love Barrett's performance as number 1 in this episode. I think this crew, as short-lived as it was, really, really gelled together very well, considering the little time that they had. And next, let's talk about the bridge of the Enterprise itself. Now, this bridge would become iconic in the original series and in recreations in other Star Trek shows for many, many years. Still to this day, this is the iconic Enterprise bridge. It looks very different in this episode, but I really like it this way. It doesn't have the red or the orange as Philippa Georgiou Mirror Universe called it when she stepped on it in Star Trek Discovery. I disagree with her that it's orange. To me, it's red, but I digress. And I love how it came to look. It became iconic, but I also like this version as well. It looks very functional. It looks very, very sterile in many ways, with the, if you want to call them, very, very light blue or grey turbolift doors, and the accents on the handrails and the stations. The computers in the stations as well look a little bit different from how they would come to look. The sound effects on the bridge are very familiar. They are what they would ultimately come to be, with a little bit of fine-tuning, I think, but this bridge just looks so cool. I liked it immediately on this rewatch preparing for this video, and I've always liked it. The next thing I like very, very much is that when Pike leaves the bridge and goes to his cabin or his quarters, he walks through the corridors of the ship and he walks past 2 people wearing casual clothes. This is really cool. This is a ship where people will be on shift, off shift, they'd have leisure time. So yeah, you are going to see people walking around in casual clothing. So why was this discontinued? We never saw this really again in Star Trek, the original series. People were always in their uniforms, with very, very few exceptions. The only immediate examples I can think of are probably Janice Rand when she was in her quarters in Charlie X, and Uhura when she was in her quarters in the Tholian Web. I can't immediately think of any other examples of casual clothing being worn by our crew. So this to me is something I really liked and makes it feel more real world. The next thing I like, as Pike enters his cabin, he walks past his television set, his telly as we would call this in the UK. I really like that little addition to his quarters. In the 60s, projecting what the future would look like, of course there would be a telly in there. Why would there not be? On top of his telly, he also has his pistol, and he has his hat as well. So I love the fact that his hat is on the telly. We don't get to see him in the hat, sadly, but it's there, and it's clearly part of his uniform that he will wear on occasions. So I really like that little detail. And then as Pike settles into his quarters, he calls Dr. Philip Boyce to come and join him, and I really like this guy from the get-go. He is the template for what Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy would become, obviously, but Philip Hoyt in this role, a massive plus for me in this episode, and he delivers immediate chemistry with Pike in the doctor versus bartender scenario that we have in this exchange, and he gives Pike this wonderful speech of a man either lives life as it meets him head on, and he licks it, defeats it, so to speak, or he turns his back on it and starts to wither away, because he senses Pike is at a crossroads. And I love this exchange between Boyce and Pike in this scene. Wonderful stuff indeed. Now, they get interrupted by Spock, a call from the bridge, and another thing that I really like are the desk monitors. Absolutely wonderful. We get to see Spock on this little screen that Pike pushes the button on, which makes me wonder why, on reflection, Pike uses the communicator to call Boyce to his quarters. That is a little bit weird now that I come to think about it. But the desk monitors I really like. They're all throughout the ship. They're in Pike's quarters here. They're on the bridge as well, on the captain's chair, on the stations. Everybody has one of these, and why wouldn't they? I think they are a convenience that each officer at their station would have. So, massive positive for me is those desk monitors. Now, jumping forward to the next thing that I really like, and this is sort of an extension of the hat on top of the TV that I mentioned just a moment ago, is when we get to the transporter room, when the landing party is getting ready to beam down, we see them wearing jackets, field jackets. And if you're beaming down to a planet or going down to a planet via shuttle, whatever, it stands to reason that you wouldn't just be wearing what you're wearing on the ship. It might be cold. You would have equipment, you would have jackets. I mean, they've got backpacks full of stuff. And this to me really sets the tone for this being very practical, very functional. And I don't know why they didn't continue this, because the jackets look cool, the equipment looked cool, and they wouldn't need this. So those jackets and equipment are a massive positive for me. Absolutely wonderful to see. So I love that. And we're down on the planet now. We're down on Talos 4, and the next thing that I really like in this is the Talosian reveal. They find the group of survivors, or alleged survivors, shall we say, on Talos 4, and then we cut to this reveal that they are being watched. And that Talosian reveal to me it's quite spooky, but it's very, very effective. The next thing I love are the laser pistols that they are carrying as part of this landing party. Now, you might wonder why I'm not calling them phasers or phaser pistols, at least. I do seem to recall that in the first pilots, they were not actually known as phasers yet. They were known as lasers. So that's what I'm calling them here. But I love this design. They would be used in the first two pilots. They would reappear here and there throughout the series as weapons usually used by villains or antagonists. I remember there was one in the Man Trap used by Professor Crater specifically. So I really like this design, and I love what came to be the iconic phasers from the series, the Type 1 and the Type 2, but these I just really, really like as well. So massive plus from myself in this instance for this pilot. So moving on, the next thing I love is the briefing room set. They return to the ship, they've lost their captain, they're sat in this wonderful briefing room. Again, this is something that would be in the first two pilots of Star Trek, the cage here, and then Where No Man Has Gone Before. I like this set. Much like the bridge, it's very sterile in this episode. It's in the second pilot, it's painted more red, livened up a bit, and I just like this set very, very much. And that's all I have to say about that, really. Next, I really like, once we have the introduction of Susan Oliver as Vina, once they have that introduction and they end up on their journey together in the episode, they're in the cell or in the various simulations or illusions, whatever you want to call them. I like their chemistry. Immediately they have good chemistry, and I think the casting of this pilot episode was very, very diligent. I don't know how much time this took to get the casting of our two principal characters, really, because that's what they are in this. Our two principal characters are Pike and Vina, and boy do they have that chemistry, boy do they play off each other, and it's a wonderful result. Massive thumbs up on that from all who were involved in this episode. Wonderful stuff indeed. The next thing I really like is how they addressed Pike's journey in this pilot episode, what I'm going to call Pike's burnout. And the scene that delivers this with a hammer blow really effectively for me is the scene where they're having the picnic and he meets his old horse, Tango, you old devil you. They think of everything, don't they? I just love that scene so much. And he comes to realize what's happened to him, why he's been stagnating, why he's been pondering if he's in the right place, what his future is, what his place is in the universe. This to me is a pivotal moment because he realizes that conversation with the doctor that he had, or the bartender, he understands the doctor's answer now, and he needed this experience to realize that. So that realization of his burnout, that he's at a crossroads, is just so pivotal to me in this wonderful episode. Massive love for that. Then we have the reveal of why Vina can't leave. Now this was a tricky one for me because I almost put this in the section of the bad, of what I didn't like. But then I thought, is it a good? Is it a bad? Is it both? It kind of is. I'm going to put it in the good category alone here, but I'll explain to you why I like it and I don't like it. It gives her a valid reason for not wanting to leave, but it's a very cosmetic reason. She's very functional. And in the Federation, even though it wasn't officially called that, these days you would hope that there would be some means of helping her to live with that, either emotionally or even cosmetically, medically. Would there be means of restoring her to an appearance which would be more comfortable for her? And the reason it was almost a bad as well is because it is a very not fickle, that's not the word I'm looking for, is it? But a more shallow is the word I'm looking at, reason for not wanting to leave. But especially as a, dare I say, as a woman, I think it was probably an understandable reason, but to be debated. But I did like this reveal. I thought it was very powerful, but I didn't, unlike Pike, fully agree with her reasons, shall we say. But it stands, it's in the good category. And the final thing I loved, they return to the ship, they've got our captain back, he's back on the bridge. I loved the little bit of bridge banter that we have going on, where Yeoman Colt says, just curious who would have been Eve. Number one cuts her off. You've delivered your report. Dr. Boyce has a little bit of a joke with Pike about Eve as in Adam, as in all ships' doctors are dirty old men. So I loved that, and that really set the tone for what would become quite often the final scene in Star Trek the original series, where there's a little bit of bridge banter, usually between Kirk, Spock and McCoy, and a little bit of slapping on the back and laughter to end the episode. So we ended on a high, and they're off to their next mission, and we've got that iconic theme playing, the Enterprise out, departing Talos 4, some lovely remastered effects there again, and our first episode is complete. So that is the goods, the highs if you like, all done and dusted. Now let's move on to what I didn't like in this episode. Let's check out the lows or the bads. And I'm going to start with the salmon uniforms. Now the original pilot uniforms were not what we would come to get used to in the original series. They were quite different. They didn't have the black collar. The material was obviously different. Famously, what would become to known as Command Yellow was actually green. It just appeared more gold or yellow when it was on film. And I think with these original uniforms, especially the one Pike was wearing and the way it was shot, you could actually kind of tell that this was green. Less so in the second pilot. I think Kirk's version of this uniform, slightly different again around the collar, was definitely looked yellow as opposed to green, but I think you can see a greeny tinge to the one Pike's wearing. But we had what would come to known as Command Yellow. We had what would be Science and Medical Blue. That stayed the same. But instead of the familiar red shirt, which was tied to engineering and those poor guys in security, we instead had a sort of orangey, salmony colour, or pink even, I don't know. This was worn by, amongst others, Chief Petty Officer Garrison, who sits at the communications station in this episode. Also, the female version of this was worn by Yeoman Colt. I really didn't like these female version uniforms as well. They just didn't look right to me. So no, not a fan of that salmon colour. Very, very happy that that changed to the red. The next thing that is jarring for me, having come to know other iterations of Trek, is, and this is budgetary, this is just lack of funds to be able to make things look the way you would want them to look in the 1960s, but I don't like the sparseness of Pike's quarters. Now, you already know I like some of the detail in there, like the television and the hat on top of the TV, and there are one or two other items of decor. The window behind him, and as he's lying on his bed, has moving stars in the remastered version, so that's a nice little touch. But in general, the sparseness of his quarters, when you come to see what Pike's quarters looks like in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the contemporary series, it's night and day. But it's a minor quibble, if you like, but you would think the captain of a starship would not have to rough it quite so much on what ultimately turns out to be the flagship of the Federation. Although that was never actually stated in the original series, to my knowledge. It was never actually identified as such. Only from the Next Generation onwards was the Enterprise considered to be the flagship. The next thing that's jarring, but understandable for the time, is paper. While Pike is in his quarters, he has a little clipboard, and he turns some paper over on it. In the 23rd century, as it would come to be established later on, why would they have paper? But again, budgets, the ability to tell stories effectively. I mean, this was quickly abandoned, to be fair. In the original series, they would have these pads that Kirk would sign on occasion, fuel consumption reports, that sort of thing. But the presence of paper here was a little bit jarring for me, but understandable. We've got to let them off for that. Now, another thing I didn't like is something that was on the list of things that I did like, and that was the monitor, the desk monitors. A little thing that I noticed about that I've always noticed about that, is that when Spock calls from the bridge to tell them that there are crash survivors on Talos, Pike answers the call on that monitor. What is Spock looking into? Because he's got his back to the station, which I perceive to be the engineering bridge station, because that's where he walks from in the opening scene, as if that is his station in that first episode. But what's he looking into then? That doesn't make sense to me. It takes me out of the moment. I'm being a little bit nitpicky there, but hey, that's my prerogative. But interesting that one was to me. So the next thing I didn't like, and they quickly got rid of this, thank goodness, was the time warp effect. And they quickly changed it from time warp factor to just warp factor, which I think works a heck of a lot better. But when they go into time warp factor 7, I think it was, in the pilot episode, we get this overlay of space on top of the characters on the bridge, and I just didn't like that. I don't think I ever liked that in any version of the cage I've ever seen. And the first time I ever saw the cage, just as a little bit of trivia, it was on a VHS cassette video that was released when they couldn't find all of the original colour footage. They had some in black and white, some in colour, and they released a version which contained both colour and black and white, and it kept on changing. Eventually they found the missing colour footage and they released it, and then they remastered it to what we have today, and it's so much nicer to watch now. But I just didn't like that time warp effect at all. It really took me out of the episode very, very much. The next thing I don't like is Yeoman Colt's hair. When we first, surely they could have done something better with her hair in this episode. Maybe I'm not up with women's hairstyle fashion of the 1960s. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it's just an opinion. I really think, wow, that's what they choose to do with her hair? That just doesn't look very nice at all. But more so than that, on a more serious note, I really don't like the way that Yeoman Colt is introduced, because Pike clearly knows who she is, because they've clearly had an interaction before, because he says, "Yeoman, I thought I told you that when I'm on the bridge," and she cuts him off and says, "Yes, that you wanted the reports before 0500 hours, I think it was, and it's 0500 now. Boy, they get up early, don't they, for the day shift on the Enterprise. But yeah, but saying that, it's an emergency. But then number one interjects after that exchange, and she says to Pike, "She's replacing your former yeoman, sir." As if Pike has no clue who this woman is or why she's there, which he clearly does. Why would she say that? That's just that's for the audience's benefit to describe it. And this is something I don't like in TV shows. Characters saying things that they wouldn't say, but are only for the audience's benefit, for the plot. So, nah, that's definitely something I don't like in this particular scene. The next thing, when we get to the planet, that takes me right out of the episode. The first time we meet Vina as a alleged crash survivor, she's in her sort of rags that she's made a little outfit for herself over the years out of whatever. Her hair is not perfect by any means, but it looks nice. But she has perfect makeup. How? Surely that's a red flag. Hang on a minute. These people have been on this planet for 18 years, surviving as best they can with minimal provisions and shelter. Where has she got this wonderful makeup from on her eyes and her lips? A perfect lipstick and eye makeup. That was just weird. Fair enough, in later illusions, where we know that they're living through these illusions that are projected onto them by the Talosians. But, and maybe this was a mistake on the Talosians' part. Maybe they just didn't realize that this would be an issue. But again, I'm nitpicking, but that is something that I always notice and I wonder about. The next thing that I don't know if I dislike it as much as it is a comedy thing, is that the back of the Talosians' heads looked like bottoms. When I grew up, I used to joke that I used to call them bum heads. It just looks ridiculous. I also didn't like the way their veins and their heads throbbed. It used to give me the creeps. To be fair, that was a really good effect. I don't know how they achieved that. Those Talosians, this should have been a like from me, a high. They looked amazing for the time, but having the backs of their heads look like human posteriors was an interesting choice, I thought, and not something that you can't see once you've seen it. So that was definitely jarring, shall we say. The next thing that I really don't like, having come to know Spock and the crew of the Enterprise very well as we do in the original series, is Spock tries to leave orbit. He tries to go away and get away. The Spock that we come to know would not do this. Sure, there have been times in the original series where Kirk would say, "Get my ship out of there, protect my ship at all costs." So Spock is doing here what the captain would want him to do. But the Spock that we've come to know, the Spock who risks his life for Captain Pike later in the menagerie, and many, many times for Kirk, he wouldn't do this. So to be fair, we don't know the character yet. This is not the final version of Spock. So if you're coming into this blind, you probably wouldn't think twice about it. But rewatching it many, many, many times as I have now, countless times, it's a problem for me that Spock tries to leave orbit with the ship and leave Captain Pike and the women behind. There you go. And then the final thing that I really didn't like was Pike's anger as an effective weapon. As Vina rightly points out to him, how long can you maintain negative thoughts? A minute, an hour, what good will that do? And I think that's so true. It would be impossible to maintain that level of rage, especially when he gets his hands on the Talosian finally. There must have been an adrenaline surge when he did that. Now the Talosian the keeper tries to react and changes himself or herself into the gorilla sort of monster, which doesn't put Pike off. Now, what I always wonder here is why did the Talosian not just create the illusion in that second that he wasn't there and create the illusion that Pike's hands just suddenly are grasping nothing? Pike would instinctively release his grip and you're back at square one. Problem solved from the Talosians' point of view. So yes, it's a storytelling device, just suspend your disbelief, but that was a problem for me. And there you go. That ends the bads, the lows. Let's move on to some trivia. Okay, trivia time. Here are some interesting trivia points that you may not know about The Cage, this original pilot for Star Trek. So, first one, music is by Alexander Courage, and he gets credit whenever that TOS theme is played in any version of Star Trek since. So it plays very often, quite subtly sometimes, in modern day Star Trek, and his name is always mentioned when that happens. So next, the first shot we see of the Enterprise, we see its hull registry, which is NCC 1701. Now, have you ever wondered what NCC stands for? I can tell you that it stands for Naval Construction Contract. The 1701, I don't recall if there's a specific significance to that. I didn't look that up. I've never heard that there was such a significance, but you can be sure for the next video, I'll have checked that and we'll mention it if so. Jeffrey Hunter, who played Captain Pike, sadly died at only the age of 42 in 1969 after a tragic accident where he hit his head and fractured his skull, and he died the next day. So I often wonder what would have become of Star Trek had he continued in the role, had he returned for the second pilot. Would Star Trek have been the same show? Would it have had the cultural impact that it went on to have with the iconic crew of William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Nichelle Nichols, Walter Koenig and George Takei, amongst others, Majel Barrett, Roddenberry as well, of course, and Grace Lee Whitney, again amongst many others. But very, very sad that Jeffrey Hunter passed away in such tragic circumstances at such a young age. And he was a very talented actor who, like many at the time, was well known for his performances in westerns. And Star Trek, the original pilot, was meant to be, according to Gene Roddenberry and his pitch to the networks, Wagon Train to the Stars, which they really didn't get in that first episode. John Hoyt, who played Dr. Philip Boyce, had a very, very storied career in film and television. He cropped up in other sci-fi performances on occasion, including the original Battlestar Galactica in the late 70s, early 80s, where he was in the episode Baltar's Escape as Sire Domra. The Enterprise geologist in The Cage was played by actor Ed Madden, who would later reprise his role in the original series The Enemy Within as geological technician Fisher. Now, it's never explicitly stated that these are the same character, but given that his character in The Cage was listed as geologist, I'm going to assume that this was Fisher. Malachi Throne, who played the voice of the Keeper in this episode, would go on to play Commodore Jose Mendez in the two-part episode The Menagerie, which featured footage from The Cage as well. He would also go on to play Senator Pardek in Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5 episode Unification, Parts 1 and 2. John Lomer, who played Dr. Theodore Haskins, one of the alleged survivors, would appear twice more in Star Trek the original series as Tamar in Season 1 episode Return of the Archons, and Old Man in Season 3 episode For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. The transporter chief from The Cage was actually named Pitcairn, and his character did feature prominently in a comic series featuring the adventures of Captain Pike and the crew of the Enterprise during this part of Star Trek history. Very early in this pilot episode, Spock said that the fourth planet in the Talos system seems to be Class M, oxygen atmosphere. Class M planets were established from the very get-go as Earth-like and would continue to be mentioned frequently all throughout Star Trek. Captain Pike expresses his frustration at not being used to having a woman on the bridge, despite the fact that number one was a female present on the bridge, a massive insult to her that he didn't think of her as a female. But not only that, there were actually 3 women on the bridge at this time, as we can see from this shot of the third woman sitting at a station on the right side of the bridge. The majority of the Talosians were actually played by women. Now, it's not actually ever explicitly stated that the Talosians are male or female. Maybe they're both, maybe they're neither. But most of them were played by females. The Keeper played by Meg Wiley, who I believe had quite a fine career in acting and was alive until quite recently in the year 2002, I believe. This episode was directed by Robert Butler, and this was his only outing in Star Trek, other than the reused footage in the two-part Menagerie later in Season 1, for which he gets credit. And the castle shown as Rigel 7 in this episode, that painting of that castle was reused at least once to my memory, possibly even more, but I recall it being reused in the third season original episode Requiem for Methuselah, where it was the residence of Mr. Flint. Now, that was before the episodes were remastered, and any such examples where paintings or scenes were repeated were changed for the remastered editions, which was a very positive step. So there you have it. That's episode number 1, the pilot, done and dusted. I really enjoyed that. My first attempt at doing these highs and lows and trivia, and hopefully I'll get more polished at it as we go. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please give this new channel a like and a subscribe if you can. Let me know what you think in the comments. What were your thoughts on this episode? Do you have any highs and lows? Do you have any trivia that I have missed? I'm always happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching along. You all take care, stay safe, travel well, and live long and prosper. Bye-bye.